I don't know if you guys saw, but Jeffrey Sachs, American scholar who is deeply involved when it comes to the reopening of Russia post the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's been involved in a lot of podcasting since then, a lot outside of the podcasting, but a lot of podcasting since then. And he's almost I don't know if he paints a figure of a learned, experienced diplomat, that he's been through the ringer. He was there for when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia began to open up. And then as Russia began to open up, they did shock therapy. And oh boy, he looks back upon it, and while he doesn't much regret what he did, he doesn't really regret any decision he makes. Now it seems to be that he is of the opinion that Russia is afforded a certain section of territory, and that all of her actions towards them have been so unbearably aggressive that how could the West have expected any other outcome? So his primary framing of the war is one of what you could say Western blame, that the United States provoked the war, while Russia was the one that started the war, legally speaking. They pulled the first trigger, they fired the first ammunition, but they're not the ones who are responsible. And I disagree with this framing for a lot of reasons. I disagree with this framing because Jeffrey Sachs framing, I think, discounts how much Russian nationalism and historical chauvinism plays into it. The fact that when Donald Trump is having private meetings right now with Vladimir Putin in order to try to figure out an end to this war, that's the stated reason. Now, I am of the suspicion that on the Russian side, while they would be happy with an end of the war, it should be an end of the war under their maximalist demands still. That is still their framing for the war. And so I think they have a secondary purpose of delaying American action. But the stated purpose from the Trump administration is to bring about an end to the war. And he sits down with Putin. And what does Putin talk about? Does he say, hey, let's talk about all these kidnapped children? Hey, let's talk about, what exactly the dividing line is going to be? Hey, let's talk about X, Y, Z. Yeah, there's some of that. There's some, demands for territory not yet conquered. But there's also a lot of historical mumbo jumbo. Remember that historical presentation that Vladimir Putin did when he was getting interviewed by Tucker Carlson, and he talked about how Prince Yaroslav the Wise once rode here and there and everywhere and such. Well, apparently he did the same thing in private with Trump during these peace negotiations. He was Reddit posting in private with no audience for Donald Trump under, I presume, the assumption that said posting was going to convince him. See, I think a lot of times weight is put into the idea that Vladimir Putin is a KGB operator. He's somebody who knows how to do diplomacy. He's somebody who is pretty high level at this game. And I'm not saying that isn't true, but what I am saying is that we're all human. And I think one of Putin's human attributes is the fact that he is kind of a Redditor. And that's not diminish. That's not to try to diminish Reddit in comparison to Vladimir Putin. That's just to say that he paragraph posts, and this type of chauvinistic viewing of Russian history, retelling of Russian history, is way up his alley. Before the invasion of the war even began, Vladimir Putin released articles on the Russian invasion of Ukraine being justified through the fact that Ukraine has only existed as a proto-Russian state, as an extension of the Ruski Mir, and since it is an extension of the Ruski Mir, it can only be, which Russian world, it has to be part of the Russian world. It's an extension of it, has to be part of it. And so in that essay, he talks about the idea that Russia can only allow a situation where Ukraine is either an extension of Russia, therefore extremely beneficial to its interests within its alliance structure, within its economic structure, extremely friendly to Russia, culturally intertwined with Russia. It can only exist like that, or it cannot exist at all. And so, I mean, I can go into what I disagree with when it comes to Jeffrey Sachs' analysis in the realm of placing blame strategically or diplomatically outside of the realm of chauvinistic retellings of history that I think influences Putin, not only Putin's, but many other Russian leaders' decision making. I could talk about America's area of responsibility and the agreements that Russia and Ukraine and the United States made, and I could disagree with Jeffrey Sachs. But my primary disagreement is that the framing of this war as a NATO reaction and isolating that component and looking at that in a vacuum is extremely reductive. And that's the way that Jeffrey Sachs has done it. That is the way that John Mearsheimer has done it. That is how many of the traditional apologist style realists have chosen to approach analyzing the war. And I don't find that particularly layered. I don't find that particularly interesting. And we don't do a lot of reaction content to this out of the fact that I don't find it interesting. It gets a lot of eyeballs. Jeffrey Sachs and John Mearsheimer, they get invited on a lot of programs to talk about the war. Everything from Piers Morgan to the Mom and Pop Shop podcast. But it's just something that I don't find particularly interesting. I remember having to read some of Mearsheimer's work for Lonerbox's video on his channel, and it was I did not find it particularly enthralling. I'm not saying there's nothing to be found from it, period. I just didn't agree with the sections. I didn't agree with sections, and I also didn't find it that what's the word? It didn't give me aperture. It didn't give me political aperture. Okay. So that's my problem with Jeffrey Sachs. And so when I see people like glazing him, and mind you, this is in response to the video we're about to watch, the vitriol for Professor Jeffrey Sachs among European elites is due to the fact that he tries to drag European elites out of the delusional, nonsensical, infantile understanding of geopolitics. And the quote they focus on is, "The stupidest idea of NATO is the so-called open door policy. Are you kidding? NATO reserves the right to go where it wants without any neighbor having any say whatsoever. This is nonsense stuff. This is not even baby geopolitics." I mean, it's been the standard policy for quite some time, and it led to a lot of people joining NATO. I don't. It'd be one thing for him to say, "Hey, this could aggravate states that NATO expands to, and those states have aggressive interests in relation to that expansion, and those are conversations that can be talked about." But the idea that NATO has the right to add new members as it pleases because it's an alliance, I mean, of course, an alliance would affirm that it is the right to do that, even if just as a tool of leverage to make sure that that is always on the table. I don't know why that would be baby geopolitics. Um, I don't understand that. I mean, I get that he might disagree with how that might be perceived by those on the receiving end, but the idea that this is baby geopolitics or it has no meaning behind it, even if you were to declare such a thing without any intent of expansion, the threat of expansion of the NATO alliance, if you are somebody who views states in Eastern Europe, for example, as the most obvious example, as seeing NATO going into those states as difficult for your interests, difficult for you, either aggressive interests or you have some misgivings about what NATO's plans are. Um, if then you would want to negotiate with NATO to stop that expansion. So if NATO comes out and says in its charter, "We will not expand unless there is a threat specifically to a current NATO member, and or we do not hold the right to expand." What exactly would you expect in the chart? See, this is what I mean by it doesn't really feel like it would be one thing for him to say like this can be threatening to other states. Another thing for him, "Bosh, this is ridiculous." I don't know if this is just that his language has been podcastified, because Jeffrey Sachs did not used to always talk like this. If you listen to Jeffrey Sachs and how he used to talk before, it really feels like the podcast circuit and the type of casuality and maybe online discussion has had an influence on how he publicly professes. I do not know. Anyway, this is not the clip by which we are talking about today. This is the clip. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, he went on a program and was going back and forth with an Italian parliamentarian on Italian television. Why was Jeffrey Sachs on Italian television? I don't know. Go ask the Italians. Sure, they can tell you. but he was on Italian television, and he starts doing one of his spiels about the war, and the Italian parliamentarian disagrees with that spiel, and then Jeffrey Sachs posits, "Do you think I'm a liar?" And the parliamentarian doesn't back down, eliciting what I think is one of the is the strangest reaction I have ever seen from Jeffrey Sachs, and feels so overwhelmingly performative that my eyes nearly rolled straight out of my head. Listen to this.
It's incredible. È incredibile. You don't know how much the United States. Non sa quanto gli Stati Uniti hanno.
Oh, it is on Italian TV, so I do have to translate it, because they translate it into Italian.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. You don't know how much the United States paid for the overthrow of Yanukovych.
Per il rovesciamento.
I was there. I saw it. I was around Maidan.
I
was there as well, Minister. I was Minister.
Now it's my
Senator, it's my turn. Please, Professor Sachs. You weren't there when I was taken around, and they explained to me, we gave 15,000 to this one, 20,000 to that one, and you said it didn't happen? Yes, I said it didn't happen. Yes, I am saying that you're lying, just like with the vaccine. And you know what? One moment. It's obnoxious, it's really obnoxious. You know what? You may sound obnoxious. Are you calling me a liar? Yes, absolutely. I think you're a Putin propagandist. You're making Putin as propaganda. How dare you? I'm stunned, frankly. That's my opinion. Did you call me a liar? Yes.
Facciamo una cosa. Sulla lettura dei fatti di
Books and investigations have been written about events of Maidan, and they are very different positions. Not really. One of the position or another doesn't necessarily mean one is lying and one is telling the truth. But you made 20 broadcasts of Maidan telling how Ukrainians wanted to be European. I remember those broadcasts. So you were also fooled? It was an American conspiracy? No, I told what happened, Senator. When you covered the Euromaidan, I remember those broadcasts. You were there, right? Didn't you tell about the Ukrainian youngsters? The Ukrainian youngsters that wanted to become Europeans? Were they all paid by the CIA? Well, we'll pause this and talk about this after the clip's done. But dude, that's beautiful. And another question. Why the Ukrainian army in Crimea had no bullets? The Putin's little green men took it in 2 minutes. There were Americans in Crimea? Professor Sachs. Without Professor, the debate in Italy is very heated. Sometimes too much so. Have your say, don't worry, we made it. It's heated, but it's absolutely shocking.
Sorry.
Okay. Before anything else. Oh my God. What an absolute pansy. How thin does your skin have to be for his conception of how Euromaidan occurred to react to that? Which, I mean, there's been so many books that have been published that talk about Euromaidan, from inside Euromaidan, from journalist perspective, from the perspective of protesters, about why they went out and did this. And it's not just like they wanted to protest and then they overthrew the government. The escalation of events, the escalation of violence, the months-long protests from Euromaidan to Automaidan. And he didn't just go around paying people $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 and that's how we overthrew Yanukovych. I'm saying that's a lie. You're a liar. And his reaction to that is not to say, like, the best case scenario for him would have been saying, look, there were payments made by U.S. aid to organizations that would be involved in the protest movement, whether that is providing medical aid or that is things like telling protesters their rights or certain things like that, like certain civil society organizations that were given money before Euromaidan, which I know Mearsheimer is also a huge opponent of, saying that, it's saying that democratize. I mean, he literally writes the way he writes about it in his articles is like the democratization of Ukraine is like a threat to Russia. The way he writes it is it's the only way they could perceive it, because he just views it as a realist, completely removing any of the ideological contingent to it. It's the same reason why they have blinders on it on themselves when it comes to Putin's historical chauvinism, or how much Russia's historical claims and its revisionism matters to him. But just this reaction, it gives me the ick in so many ways, but I think in the primary way, it gives me the ick as if he has been done some grand indignity, that he is a man of such high stature, of such high reclaim, of such prestige, that to be on such a program with a former government minister and senator, okay, you're on Italian TV, Italiano. You're gonna go on Italiano TV and you're gonna speak to the Italians, right? In Italian. And you know what they're gonna be discussing? They're gonna be discussing European issues that he was a minister of a government that had to deal with. Like he says he was in Maidan. I mean, the start of it is just a perfect example of this. Jeffrey Sachs is so used to going on these podcasts now, talking to people who don't know nothing because they never did nothing. And when he does that, he can just kind of direct the conversation wherever. And so he opens this up with, "Were you at Maidan?" And the dude's like, "Yeah, I was at Maidan." It was like, "Well, you weren't at the specific place where I saw this." Like, okay, well, so it was a rhetorical question. It was just an opener to a line you wanted to throw. It wasn't a question. And then you failed the rhetorical question because it was no longer rhetorical because he was there. So immediately it was showing that he was I don't know if he was trying to establish a certain level above in this conversation with, again, a current sitting Italian senator and a former government minister. I don't know if he thought that this was going to put him above him and he was going to be able to throw down the logic and the law. I also don't know why he thought that this current minister wouldn't know what he's talking about. I don't know if I should feel bad and this is him getting, desensitized to the American political scene and our politicians being sometimes out of their depth when it comes to talking to people about the complexities of geopolitics or the history of what happened at Maidan or whatever. But he immediately seemed to establish that he just felt that I thought that was the purpose of it. I thought the purpose was to establish, like, I was there, I saw this. He wasn't ready for him to say I wasn't there. I mean, that's what he was ready for. He was ready for him to say I wasn't there. He was not ready for him to be there. And once he was there, I think he should have pulled back. He should have pulled back and shift course. But instead, he kept going through with this idea of these payments that were given out. And the way he described it was a lie. It's one thing to say that U.S. aid gave money to organizations, right? And these organizations, some of these civil society groups, were involved in the Euromaidan and protest movement. It's another thing for him to say that the American government was, in his way, $15,000, $10,000, go overthrow the government. Like they're on the street corner handing it out to protesters to go overthrow the government, to go risk their lives. I mean, over 100 people died. People got sniped. And he says to overthrow Yanukovych, even though if you go into U.S. aid and all the groups that gave to, a lot of the groups, the vast majority of the groups that U.S. aid gave money to was not involved in the protest movement in any way. Some were, but that's because the protest movement spanned across a large section of Ukrainian society. And when you have such a gigantic protest movement where people are being shot and killed, civil society groups, not surprising that they're going to get involved. But that framing of the situation is not as flamboyant for the podcast route. It's not as flamboyant. It's not also as aggressive on the side of the West. Because to say the CIA overthrew Yanukovych or the American government overthrew Yanukovych and then Russia invaded is to just make it look like, oh, it's like a pawn between two imperial powers and the Ukrainian people are caught in the middle. But if you posit the idea that, the United States actually, if you listen to the Victoria Nuland phone call and other conversations at the time, wanted there to be successful negotiations between the protesters and the government, where there would be a legitimate election. And the actual overthrow of Yanukovych in how it played out was actually a fear for the United States, because they were scared of exactly this outcome, which is the Russians taking the opportunity to spiral the situation out of control, which is exactly what they did. It's a much more layered analysis than the United States overthrew Yanukovych. You could still, if you wanted to say the United States had no business giving any money to any civil society group in Ukraine post-Soviet collapse, the United States should have basically said, after the Soviet Union collapsed, good luck, okay? Au revoir, starve or don't starve, good luck to you. Mind you, Ukraine was a huge capital for human trafficking. There was a huge problem with drugs on the street when it came to children. Like, Ukraine needed support that we provided, and there was also huge corruption issues. There was huge issues with civil society and the government feeling that they could crack down upon the press. For example, there were journalists that were assassinated by previous Ukrainian presidents, widely known in Ukraine. So he tries to boil down that complex picture of what U.S. aid gave aid to we were just like handing out money at the protest to overthrow the government. He dumbed it down, and a sitting minister, a sitting senator, listened to that dumbed down version. It was like, yeah, that's a lie. I don't know if a better word for Jeffrey Sachs, I don't think he would have cared because of the way he reacted, would have been distortion. But a distortion just sounds like a lie, but like a little softer, doesn't it? No? To me, it's pretty clear that Jeffrey Sachs got confronted by somebody who was there when he was not ready to be in a room with somebody who was there, who had that experience, who then was willing to call him out when he tried to establish a series of facts that on so many other programs he was able to establish and remain unchallenged, because he's just been going on this podcast circuit after podcast circuit, and these people are just softball interviews. And then he's in this environment, and he just cannot, it's just above him. It's just above him. And it's one thing for not only him to just ask, are you calling me a liar, like 2 or 3 times? Like, yeah, he said it. But the dramatic reaction when the camera cuts back to the fact that the Italian producer or the commentator, the host, I don't know what you want to call him, the Italiano, he is trying to get his attention, like, Professor, and he's just still just, oh my God. He was not ready for the pushback. Were you there? I was there. Probably works well when nobody in the room was there. Yeah, I imagine. He was like, I saw it with my own eyes. How could you saw me a liar? And then you go on social media the next day, Jeffrey Sachs schools clown about who was really at Maidan. He was there, you weren't. But in this room, it doesn't work. One more. I got to see it one more time. I got to see it one more time.
Lei non c'era quando io sono stato portato in giro, mi hanno spiegato, abbiamo dato 15.000 a questo, 20.000 a quest'altro. Sta dicendo che non è successo,
Sì,
che non l'ho
sentito?
sentito?
Sì, penso che lei sta mentendo. Esattamente come sul vaccino. E posso dire una cosa?
Un attimo, uno per volta, prego.
È odioso, veramente odioso.
Sarà odioso, ma io penso che lei fa assolutamente.
Sì, sta chiamando un bugiardo.
Io penso che lei fa propaganda putiniana.
I'm stunned. Sono scioccato, francamente.
È la mia opinione.
Call me a liar?
Sì.
Mi ha chiamato un bugiardo?
Però, facciamo una cosa. Sulla lettura dei fatti di Maidan sono stati scritti libri, inchieste.
Sì.
Ci sono...
He looks genuinely sad. Oh my God. Oh my God. Can we emote this? I'm sorry. I'm a little cynical today. Can somebody do some emote magic on this? Oh my God. He looks sad. That really took because he just said, did you really call me a liar? Like 3 times. I don't know if he expected on the 3rd time. He said, no, I would never call the great Professor Sachs a liar. He just shuts down. does anybody really look at this? Because I saw there were some people that were reacting to this and they thought like how dare they talk to Jeffrey Sachs in some way? But like, I mean, come on, he just comes off like he's limp-wristed. It'd be one thing for him to say like, look at this report or that report, or I can show you this picture or that video, I was there, or like I know that they were handing out money, but that's not what happened, so he can't. If he wanted to say, well, US Aid gave money to this civil society group, which handed like wet rags to people wiping like tear gas out of their eyes, like 6 months, a year, or 2 years before the protests occurred, that's not going to ring as, oh my God, we overthrew the fucking Ukrainian government, as the way that he described it. So he just shuts down and acts like he just got shot. I mean, like, I just don't, my God, I didn't think he'd do this badly. And you know what this leaves me thinking? This leaves me thinking that him and John Mearsheimer, these people would do so terribly, so terribly, and under a high pressure lens in an environment. Like, do you think Jeffrey Sachs or John Mearsheimer, if they were in a Jubilee type scenario with like surrounded 20 people, and they didn't say put, 20 like random Twitter users who know nothing about the war, like random people off the street, or like a random dude bro podcaster who got them on the show, but they get 20 Ukrainians or 20 people who, know about the war, 20 like historians, 20 people from their field, even just their general field, to throw questions at them. I think that these are people who thrive when they can set the table, they can place the silverware, they can put the porcelain at the table. When they can set it up all themselves and they can dot their I's and cross their T's and tell their own story. But in a high pressure environment where he's going to be asked to back this stuff up, and his credentials from his time in the 90s or as a professor isn't going to just, wipe away all critique or criticism or questioning, he just defaulted to shutting down. To the point where the host, it really felt like the host was trying to stop Jeffrey Sachs from crying. If you listen to the host, he's like, well, some people might think one thing is real and not real. Like, it didn't even sound like he really agreed with Jeffrey. It sounded like he wanted him to not cry on national television, which it does look like he's close to it, especially when his head is in his hands. And so he's trying to soothe him like a child, like a toddler, like an infant, like a homunculus, okay? like a zygote. I mean, it's just sad, man. And the thing is, I really appreciate this Italian senator and how he decides to approach that, because he doesn't approach it by saying like, oh, hey, Jeffrey, cheer up, or focus on like pampering Jeffrey Sachs' feelings. Let's get over yourself. Like, what did you expect? But he also doesn't spend the moment like going super hard, like, no, I 100% know that this. He just goes to the guy who's trying to soothe him and say, come on, dude, you were there too. You were there too. You broadcasted it. You saw the broadcasts. There isn't like two realities just to make Jeffrey Sachs feel better. I gotta watch it one more time. Sorry, this feels like therapy to me.
Ci sono posizioni molto diverse.
Ma mica tanto.
Non per forza una posizione o l'altra significa che uno mente e uno dice.
Ma lei ha fatto 20
no.
trasmissioni su Maidan, raccontando come gli ucraini volevano essere europei. Ma io me le ricordo quelle trasmissioni. E allora si è fatto prendere in giro anche lei? Era un complotto americano.
Io ho raccontato quello che è successo, senatore.
Lei quando copriva l'Euromaidan, perché io me le ricordo quelle trasmissioni, andava lì, no? Non raccontava dei ragazzi ucraini che volevano diventare europei.
Ma lì ci sono stati, ma certamente
e
ci
erano
sono
tutti
stati
pagati dalla CIA. E come mai si scusi? Faccio un'altra domanda. L'esercito ucraino in Crimea non aveva le pallottole, tanto che gli obini verdi di Putin l'hanno presa in 2 minuti. C'erano gli americani in Crimea?
Professor Sachs, professore, il dibattito in Italia è molto acceso, a volte troppo, però dica la sua, non si preoccupi, abbiamo superato.
No, è acceso.
It's absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. That's beautiful. I feel like I need a cigarette after that. Do you know what party the senator's from? No idea. Does anybody know?